If you are a regular listener to the Sociology show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for the Sociology show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. You can visit tutor2u.net/sociology for revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else you need for your A-level or sociology studies. And so for today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Robin Hadley. Hi, Rob. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the show.
That's lovely. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Robin Hadley, and I'm a social gerontologist, which means somebody who studies age and aging. And usually, although gerontology means study of aging, it's usually older people. So people are over 50 and onwards. And my sort of specialist subject is childlessness and older men, so older childless men. And I got into that because I'm an older childless man. And I started a counselling course in 2005, something like that. Did an MA, and because it was counselling, it had to be something you'd experienced. And I was really broody in my 30s. I was desperate to be a dad. So I looked into that. And that's when I found out there's very little about men's desire and experience of wanting to be a father. So then I did a MSc looking at levels of broodiness, because there's a stereotype, a bit of a myth that men aren't bothered about fatherhood and women are very bothered about motherhood. And I wondered how true that was. And in my little study, I found it wasn't true at all. Men and women round about the same level, women slightly higher. The other thing, really interesting thing, is men were more depressed and felt more isolated, jealous and anger than equivalent women. And aside from that, the childless men, the childless women and the mothers all had very similar scores for things like depression, yearning, isolation, jealousy, anger. And so it's really interesting that the fathers didn't have those. We were much lower for the fathers. So that equivalency almost among that group was really very, very interesting. And then I did a PhD at Keele University looking at the impact of childlessness on older men.
And I always ask people, Rob, who their influences were, particularly in their field. Is there anyone else writing about this, or are you all alone in the writing of childless men?
It's just me. There's a really great professor called Gail Leatherby, who really started a lot of this off, looking at her experience as a woman who wanted to be a mother and didn't become one. And that was started off in the late 90s. And she's done an awful lot of work in the field. And so she's a heroine of mine. I look up to her as so good at explaining what's going on. I just follow, just trailing her weight, but just from the angle of men. Pearl Dijkstra is a demographer, and she did a book in 2009, just lovely explanation of the statistics behind childlessness, the aging population and the lowering of the fertility rate across different countries, and actually really highlighted from that statistical point of view the absence of information of that sort of data around men. So they're two people I really swoon, for want of a better word, at. If I can get anywhere near them, it would be beyond my wildest dreams.
So you're the only male academic who looks at male childlessness, is that true?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. I'm sure there's some people coming through. It's just that I'm not aware of them yet. And certainly there's male academics looking at older men, particularly gay men and BAME, and so those specific groups and populations. So there's stuff on men, but childlessness seems to not really come into many people's research, particularly male childlessness. There's lots of research on infertility and the impact of that, but again, vast majority is around women, and in fact it's feminist researchers who highlighted that men were absent. So that feminist point of view, whose voices aren't we hearing, that angle highlighted that it's the men's voices that weren't there. And why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed Dr. Sheila Quaid, who's looked at she referred to the term child-free, and there's also Amy Blackstone, who wrote Child-Free by Choice, but they are all very much focused on, like you said, the female experience. So why do you think the male experience of being child-free or childless, whatever the correct term is, why do you think it's so under-researched?
Well, and you've hit a real gem there on terminology to use. Yeah. Because actually people are sensitive, and rightly so, about how they see themselves. So child-free, childless by choice, childless by circumstance, involuntary childlessness. It goes on and on and on. It really does. So we can just say, we appreciate there's lots of different angles. We're just going to say childlessness. And why aren't men looked at from that angle? Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think it's something to do with actually, there's a researcher called Cynthia Daniels. She did a lovely book in 2006 called Reproductive Masculinities. And one of her arguments is men, for a country, men tend to be the warriors. If actually they found out their men weren't reproducing, and quite often masculinity is defined by virility in different fields, so you're virile economically, you're virile socially, and you're virile biologically, you might be giving your potential enemies a psychological advantage if you revealed that your men weren't virile in one of those sectors, particularly the biological one. Yeah. So that's a really interesting thing. Is it also because men are in charge, and men really aren't interested in men who aren't on the ideal, high up on the ideal scale? Whereas you could also argue from the feminist point of view, is it controlling of women to have all the narrative around motherhood and non-motherhood? And it's very interesting in masculinities compared to feminisms, where reproduction is central to feminisms. That massive debate between, is becoming a mother the most feminist thing you can do, or is assisted reproductive technology the best boon for feminism because it gives you control, compared to masculinities where there's nothing on reproduction. There's some now on fatherhood and fathering and grandparenthood, but not being a father. So in Connell's Masculinities book, there's nothing on infertility, and there's only a little bit on becoming a father. And yet from the feminist, what the feminist researchers are telling us, it's actually central. It's a core piece of being a man, is how you reproduce and if you reproduce. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. And I was quite interested to go back to what you said at the very start, actually, because I suppose one of the, I'm guessing it's a myth, is that men don't have the same biological urge as women. But your research is saying that's just not true. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. That they have a desire for reproduction in the same way, a broodiness. It's just that there's no social narrative around that for men to occupy. So, for example, I have two ex-colleagues who became late onset dads. They became dads in their 40s. And after some research I published, they noticed it, got in touch independently and said, you know what, I've got a good career, I had a partner, I had all the attributes that you could want, but there was something missing. I was frustrated. It's only when I became a dad that I've realised what the absence was. And it's really interesting that they couldn't pin it down before then, that there's a frustration, there was something not quite right, but they couldn't vocalise it. There wasn't a narrative for them to say, actually, it's this that I'm missing out on. Or maybe they just didn't feel like they could actually say, you know, I really want to be a dad.
Because I was just thinking from just simply a scientific point of view, you know, can the broodiness or the biological urge be exactly the same, even though the man doesn't obviously give birth?
Is it the same? I guess biologically you could argue there must be a similar process. It's just that it's very much associated socially with women. And also there's a difference in timing. So it takes about 80 days for a sperm to mature. And obviously the menstrual cycles are shorter than that, 20 and 30 days, something like that. I know the people often say 28 days, but that is very much an average. And a lot of women argue that it's not actually true. So there must be a biological urge there. I think also I'm just going to go back to that. Men aren't bothered, women are. If there was a species that required a male and a female, and either one of those wasn't bothered about reproducing, they wouldn't get very far. They certainly wouldn't be developing technologies about food, accommodation, probably not doing technologies that we're using today to communicate. So I think from a very broad view on biology, there must be similar urges to reproduce.
Yeah. And I just wonder though, Rob, is there, again, this might be a social construct, but does the urge come at different times? It's often suggested that men may want to become fathers later on in life and the female urge is slightly earlier. That could be purely biological because there's not as much of a rush for men to have children as young.
Having said that, men die early and men die higher mortality rates all across the age range. I think peak pure sperm production is supposed to be late teenage, early 20s for men, and for women it's slightly later. I think it's around about 27, 28. I'm really going back to the back of my head to drag that out information. That's a sort of sensation. That's what I've read. So yes, there is that different thing there. When it comes to recent studies of students generally, the men tended to have quite traditional views that they'd get a career, get things sort of sorted, and then by mid-30s be having two children. And the women were a lot more ambivalent around that. Yes, I'm not sure. I want to put my career first. I'm not quite sure about having children. The real disappointing thing is how many people think that assisted reproductive technology, usually people refer to IVF, is a highly successful technology. And the reality is it's not very successful at all. It's below 30% success rate, depending on your age. The younger you are, the more successful it is. But to delay your fertility outcomes, relying on that technology is probably something you should revisit.
And can I just ask you just mentioned your responses. What was your kind of methodology? How did you collect your information from people on this?
For my MSc, that was an online survey
that
I developed. And that was a mixed methods study. So I used the usual quantitative Likert scales, and then I had open questions underneath. Because I knew it was a sensitive subject, and I know that quite often in psychology surveys, they go on for pages and pages and pages, and they're quite tiring. And I wanted to keep it short as possible. So I think I got it down to something like 29 questions, something like that. And a few of those were just actually at the end, how did you find this survey? What was good about it? What was bad about it? What would you like me to have asked? And in the other parts of the survey, if you want to tell me your story, do that. So for me, mixed methods was a really good way of seeing what was wrong with the survey, what I didn't cover, and also actually extracting from people, I mean, their choice whether they gave it or not, actually the lived experience. So one person wrote, I didn't become a mother because of a constellation of circumstances. And I thought that's just a beautiful phrase, a constellation of circumstances. Because quite often when you say childless, people just assume it's a biological thing. But there's everything connects into it. And quite often, a real high scorer is economics.
Who was in your sample then, Rob? You just mentioned males and females were questioned. What sort of ages? Yeah. Who else was in the sample overall?
Well, the age range went from 16 to, people over 16 really, and the age range went from 20 to 65. There was 290 odd replies and 232 were suitable. 107 men and 125 women, something like that. I haven't got it written down in front of me, and I should have done. But something like, but it was skewed towards female, and it was people who said they were childless, people who said they were childhood, male and female, and so I got across the whole range there, and it was interesting that all the parents, I mean, a really high score, something like 85-90%, said no, they didn't want to have another child. The sort of high level where you think something's gone seriously wrong with this. If it was an election, you'd go, this is very dodgy.
And can I ask you a personal question, Rob? And
sure.
Feel free not to answer if you don't want to. What spiked your interest in this? You said you are a child-free man yourself. Did you want children? Did you want children when you were younger? Can I
was
ask desperate.
You that? Yeah. I was desperate to be a dad. I expected to be a dad. And this is what all my men have said in various interviews. I was going to leave school, if the middle class or upper class, go to university, get a job, find a partner, and become a parent. And that's it. Their life ended there. On that arc of life, that was the peak of it. If they were working class, leave school, get a job, find a partner. But it's really interesting. It ends at becoming a parent. I was in that. That's why I believed as a younger person I would become a parent. And as I said, in my 30s, I was terribly broody. And I really noticed that my friend, who was also a colleague, when he became a dad, I was really jealous of him. So jealous that I couldn't vocalize, but I actioned because when he came back to work after his paternity leave, I avoided him. We worked in one building. I'd go down the fire escape so I wouldn't have to walk past his office. So I wouldn't have to engage with his paternity and all that. And eventually we did have a chat, even though we were both working class British men and we're not supposed to do that. Mm-hmm. And I said, you've become exactly what I want to be, and I'm not. And I didn't become that. And that's what drove my interest through doing the MA in counselling. And because it was counselling, it had to be something you'd experienced. I guess the basic question was, and this is really getting to the core of all research, was it just me? And that had been, was it just me who was sat there in their mid-30s in a bar or in any sort of social event thinking, why am I different? When am I going to fit the ideal model? That I wasn't actually thinking that, but that would be a broad thing of, I want to be a dad. How do I do that? And when I met my wife, she's a bit older, it was in my late 30s, we had a conversation and she said, I'm not going to become a mother because I'm slightly older. I'm a health professional. I know the risks involved in that. I've looked after families that have been in that situation. And there was a time in my life when I could have coped with it, but not now. And so then I had to make a choice. And one of my strands of thought was, here I am in my late 30s. Who would want me? Where would I go to find a partner who would want a guy in a lower sort of just plodding along job? I really sell myself to myself here, and not brilliantly good looking. What's in my positives? Not that much. Who would want me? And actually, I've got a fantastic woman who's beautiful and intelligent, much more intelligent than me, and for some reason wants to stick around. So that was a choice then. So partner choice would be one of the criteria for whether you become a parent or not, and at what time you choose your partner, and whether they want to become a parent.
Yeah, it's something that I've discussed with friends as well, because I find it interesting when people say they just want to become a parent, they want to become a mother or want to become a father, because surely it's about finding the right person to have the child with rather than just wanting to be a parent per se.
And then we get into attraction, and that's a whole big, what attracts one person to another person. Is it because they're very similar, or do they fill gaps in one of the my partner? She fills a lot of gaps. I really, she's a human shield for me and my inadequacies. Possibly should raise that with her at some point. I'm sure she's realised that I'm very aware of my weaknesses and she's my strength.
The reason I asked, Rob, is I'm just thinking of my own situation. So I'm early 40s now and I don't have children. And from my point of view, most of that's been because I've never been with someone until now that I wanted to have children with.
Yeah.
Is that a common experience?
It is. And actually, it's usually associated with women. There's a study from New Zealand, Wiles and Allen, and they did a really nice qualitative survey, and they found one of the reasons the childless women were childless was they couldn't find Mr. Right. That was their say, couldn't find Mr. Right. None of them childless men said they were looking for Miss Right. So there's something around that. Other studies actually say, yeah, it's finding the right partner to reproduce with. So I think originally it was usually women who were saying, I was looking for Mr. Right, I didn't find him. But I think there's more and more research coming through. Actually, it's quite a balance there, that the men are also looking for the right person to have a child with.
I wonder if there's kind of almost like a cutoff. A female friend of mine, for example, she's early 40s. She's would like children. She's having difficulties having children. She's sort of set a time of 45. If it doesn't happen by 45, then it won't happen. Is that common as well, that people there must be a peak where once people go over it, they sort of see that avenue as shut off?
I think it depends on the experience. Certainly if they're going through infertility treatment, it's so demanding in so many ways, physically, mentally, economically, socially, that there comes a time that actually, after this time, it's enough. We've done enough, as much as we can. Depends, obviously. I think there is a clock. There's definitely the biological clock. So Leslie Connold in Australia in the late 90s, early 2000s, in her study of women, found the social clock was as important as the biological clock to women. So what your peers are doing, what your parents are saying, what your cultural expectations are around age was as stronger pressure as the biological clock. But there's a biological clock for men that's starting to be appreciated now in research, that actually sperm peaks in efficiency, or certainly starts to decline in efficiency after around about the age of 35. And in my research with my men, I own them, honestly. In my participants, I keep ownership. That's because I live with them. In me, age 35 was a key age, as it was for me. Round about actually now's the time, and part of that is the social expectations of society. If you become a parent too early, that's looked down on. If you become a parent in effect too late, so late 40s, 50s, particularly for women in that case, it's looked down on. So there's that social clock around, and social sanction about what the right time is. So yeah, I think that could be becoming embedded in people's decisions actually, and these social normatives are subconscious. It's almost like they're in our bones. So it's just a feeling that becomes a thought. but it's been embedded in there from an early age.
Is that changing though, Rob? Because as life expectancy increases, people are getting married later, and people are certainly having children later. In my experience, so that must be being pushed back. That's quite common in society at the moment, isn't it?
It is. I think it depends on which society. Different cultures have different social clocks, and yes, there is evidence to say that is being pushed back because people are becoming parents later. But also, there's an increase in people not becoming parents. So the age of first birth in the UK, I think in 1970 was something like 27, and now it's above 30. So that's moving later. So there is a change there, and there will be a change. And also technology comes into this, where people are in ART, assistive reproductive technology, in their 50s, and sometimes there'll be special cases where somebody at 70 or 80 has a child, and I think really you've got to look at the fertility clinic that's doing that and why are they doing that, and that this might well be, for all the terrible term, a lost leader for them for publicity to generate more people coming to their clinic. It's a very big business.
And can I ask you something about, you said there's more people not becoming parents. And that just seemed to be more common. When I spoke to Dr. Sheila Quaid, she mentioned that the people that she spoke to who hadn't become parents never had any regrets. They never looked back and had any regrets. Does that differ to what you found?
Yeah. If she's looking at people childless by choice, then that would fit in. They made a decision and adjusted their lives to that. And particularly, I think in later life, people who are childless by choice built up social networks around that. So they tend to have stronger social networks in later life. People who are childless by circumstance, let's go for that one. No, there's more evidence that they're more liable for depression, poor health behaviours, things like that, unless they've come to terms with it to a degree and maybe had some counselling or something like that. There's a study in Sweden in 2004, Whitehoff and all, big data set study, 600,000 items across health, mortality, marital status, that sort of thing. And they found that for non-contact fathers and childless men, those two groups were more prone to all-cause mortality through bad behaviour, poor health behaviours, sleep, drinking, poor sleeping, smoking, drugs, suicide, cancers related to poor health behaviours, things like that, compared to men who were contact fathers or men living with their children. Certainly there's some demographic studies that say childless individuals are more prone to those sort of mortality and illnesses than people who are parents. However, there's some other studies that say during parenthood, people aren't as happy as childless people, but afterwards, and certainly in grandparenthood, the grandparents are a lot happier than people who are childless. And that's something missing. So a lot of my men said there's something missing in my life, which I mentioned earlier. And that's definitely true in later life, particularly with new technology where people are posting on Facebook and social media, sharing their times with their grandkids. And actually, to people without children who are childless by circumstance, then it's another indication of what they're missing.
Because I just wondered, could there just be an element of, obviously your stats on health go against what I'm about to say. Could there be an element of just pure curiosity though? So, those people who never have children are curious, what if? But those people who do have children, maybe they question, what if I never had children?
They could question that. And I'm sure they probably do at different times through parenthood. Why did I do that? And actually, that's something that's said quite often to childless people. You're lucky. You're lucky. And I think depending on your views, my view as somebody who's involuntary childless or and wanted to become a parent. I'm not quite sure how lucky I am, actually, on that, because I don't have that experience of a connection, which I expected to have. So there's a depth of connection. A lot of my men said that was the missing something that they felt that should be there. So yeah, it is, I think, one of those things you'd have to ask parents.
Yes, yeah. But certainly what you said about the statistics to do with health and so on, that stands up, certainly. And
can I just say, yeah, parenthood could well allows you to take into a different social narrative. So for men, becoming a dad, actually, I can't go down to the pub tonight. I'm a dad. I've got this responsibility, and there's a social celebration around that and a whole structure around that. But it also may give you an excuse to be very powerful, very determined, and I'm trying not to swear.
You can swear, Rob, it's fine.
Okay, to be a complete bastard
Yeah.
in a work situation, because I've got a socially sanctioned narrative. I'm doing it for my family. So I can tread you down because I want to earn more so my kids can go to, I don't know, pony club, private school, or even actually I'm going to work extra hard just so my kid can have something to eat, or a school uniform, or a phone or something.
Yeah. And can I ask, from your research, the experiences of men that were child-free, how did they differ to the experiences of females? Did you think there was anything particular about the male experience of not having children that distinguished from the female?
I'm going to say childless, because I think we're including child-free and circumstantial as childless. I think the difference is the social narratives that surround. There's nothing really around childless men for men to occupy. For women, because the motherhood mandate is so strong, there's a range of narratives that either they can pick up or are applied to them. So one might be, if you're a childless woman, you're career-minded, insert expletive. Or actually, it's a real shame you didn't have children because you're missing this. But for men, there's really not that. It's just, well, going, you're footloose and fancy-free. That dates me in age. And it almost pushes you away, and men away from that. There's no narrative where you can be a father anytime. Technically true, but more and more evidence saying socially not really accepted. And also biologically, there's issues if you are a late onset father as well. Yeah, I think there's different narratives that are applied between childless men and childless women. And certainly in later life, one of the big narratives would be all my men again, I own but I'm aware of that, said they feared being seen a paedophile.
Right.
So one of the guys I spoke to, his wife had died 2 years previously, and before she died, they had dogs, and the kids in their local little street used to come knocking and play with the dogs and take them for a walk. Once she passed on, he wouldn't let them in. I'm not letting them in. I say to them, go and tell your dad and your mum to come round with you. I don't want to be seen one of those chaps. And all the men mention this. Actually, I don't want to be seen a paedophile. Sometimes it was really overt like that. Other times it was lessened. But it was always there. And in fact, a friend of mine, when I mentioned this to her, said, I just did that this weekend with my dad. He was about an hour late coming to our house for Sunday lunch. And when I said, well, where you been? He said, I had a kickabout with some kids in the park. And you can't do that. People will see you as a paedophile. You can't be a strange man playing with kids in the park.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Like a middle-aged man who lives on his own, not married, no children, is seen as society as being a bit odd.
Yeah.
Which is, that's a real
And actually,
concern.
some fathers have said they have a similar sort of fear if kids are coming to stay over.
Yeah.
That they're very, very careful.
Yeah. I've even had a male friend who said he's had looks when he's walked with his daughter hand in hand down the road, which is incredibly sad to hear.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I don't think it does women any good either if they're sort of putting this pedestal of being all good all the time. And actually some women are paedophiles.
That got deep there, Rob. That got really deep.
I'm sorry about that.
No, but that's really interesting, because I think that's really key. Societal's view of unmarried or single men, or men who are alone, or men who don't have family. I think that's really important that they are judged in that way.
And certainly the gay men that I interviewed, that was a strong theme that came through. And one of the guys was a gay activist, and he fought against this association of being a gay man and a paedophile for so long, and actually said it is being broken now. So that was good. And one of the guys, he was a proxy. He was a grandfather, a latent grandfather, I called him. He worked in a pub to get some money, and he acted as a grandfather to the landlord's kids. So he babysat for them, he bought them Christmas presents and birthday presents, he read to them, went through their schoolwork, and he said, I love doing that, but I couldn't say it to them just in case they took it away from me.
Yeah, that's a real shame. That's really sad to hear that. Rob, can I ask you where the research is taking you now? Are you still carrying out something similar, or what are you doing with the research at the moment?
I've written a manuscript. It's with the publishers. It's under review. So hopefully, I don't know if you saw the dread in my eyes of getting that manuscript back to do the corrections and comments. Hopefully that'll be coming out sometime. It's academia, so who knows? Yes. It could be this year, could be 10 years, but hopefully it's at that stage where it'll come out soon. I'm writing papers and chapters, and I'm available for work.
Great. And I was going to ask you, actually, if people do want to get in touch, maybe they've got their own story, how can they get in touch with you?
Through my website, www.robinhadley.co.uk.
Thank you. And you're on Twitter as well?
I'm on Twitter like a rash.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, Rob. I really, really appreciate it.
It's been great. And thanks very much for the chat.
Thank you.
It's been brilliant.
If you are a regular listener to the Sociology show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for the Sociology show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes, and keep enjoying the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.